Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Change Z. I'm Alex.
I'm Taryn Free.
I'm Amrit.
And I'm Mackay.
So we've decided to start a little bit of a series focusing on racism, and this month's episode we're going to be focusing on racism against the Asian community. Now, in recent months, especially since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a big rise in the number of hate crimes that have been committed towards people of the Asian community.
Hate crimes towards the Asian community have risen by a massive 300%. What are you guys' thoughts on this?
I feel like hate crimes are committed due to all hate. There's always a start to it, and I feel like that start is always ignorance and just uneducation. Because as you said, the hate crimes have increased by 300%. It's not even just the Chinese people where people believe or people think it's their fault, that's the country origin of COVID, and people associate that with them being in lockdown. But then also you have Korean people and Japanese people being treated the same way as Chinese, being hated and being hate crimed for the same reasons Chinese people, because people clump them all in the same cohort, thinking they all came from China.
Yeah, it's also to do with the term BAME, BAME. It's like there is more to just, there's more to just different cultures and ethnicities than just Black, Asian, and other minority ethnicities. There's like a lot more. And even with the term Black and Asian, there's so many different types, and it's like they just clump you together and they just want you to be okay with that. It's like, another thing with that is it's like, so I'm Asian, but I'm like Asian Indian. There's two things to this. It's like once when I say I'm Indian, I'm like Indian or I'm Asian, people just don't want to believe the fact that India is part of Asia, and they're kind of like, no, you're Indian, you're not Asian, because they just like Asian people are usually just seen as like Chinese, Korean, and Japanese people, but it's like India is part of Asia as well, or they just want to clump you as Asia and they don't want to like let you say you're Indian. Like we were talking about the census as well. It's like you had to go through so many steps just to be able to click, you're Punjabi or you're Indian. It wasn't just, even on forms, it's always just Asian. You can never just click I'm Indian or anything like that, or like I'm Japanese, I'm Chinese. They just want you to be clumped together as Asian. And another thing with hate crimes rising as well, it's partly media's fault as well, because there was this thing that was like 33% of articles and newspapers reporting COVID used sort of like Asian and Chinese people as like the cover of it. Just like media sort of portrayed it as the Chinese virus, which, quoting Trump, it's like if there's these people who are in power and media who is going to be viewed by a lot is going to be viewed by a lot of people, is putting it forward as the Chinese people, and people sort of like start adapting those thoughts and points as well.
I feel like especially when it comes to people of power, people who are in like big positions of power, using these kind of terms of phrase like Chinese virus. Trump used it quite a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was incredibly damaging because he's someone who, despite what you think of him, lots of people looked up to Trump, especially not strictly from a political point of view, but also from a position of power. Again, he's the leader of the free world. He's the president of the United States, and he's saying these really damaging things, and it has this knock-on effect. I mean, especially with Trump's track record, he like banned like immigration. I think it's immigration, and I think flights maybe towards the start of the pandemic. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I know that definitely, towards the start of his presidency, he began to introduce policies that were anti some of these Asian communities, against some of these particularly Muslim communities mainly. And people are going to look at that and see that as the norm, especially people who have a lot more politically in common with Trump. They're gonna look at him and think, oh, this is all right to say. This is how we refer to these things. When the origin of COVID-19 wasn't even in China, it was just they were the first place that flagged it. There were traces of it found, I want to say, in Spain, somewhere in Europe. Like COVID-19 is not a strictly Asian origin, but it was spread first in China. It was clocked first in China, reported first. They were the first to respond to it. They were on the ball with this whole thing, and people are now using it as an excuse to pin everything on that community. And it's not fair, and it has led to such a detrimental view of the Asian community, especially like in the West. Because I remember like Chinese virus, Kung flu, like these kind of terms being thrown out right near the start of the pandemic. And it's only when you take a second look that you realize just how incredibly damaging it can be when it affects your view of these communities.
Mhm. And like you said with the Kung flu as well, so many Asian people like found notes left on their doorsteps with like Kung flu written on it. And it's like it's just a piece of paper, but to know that someone walked into your like garden, left this note on your doorstep, it's like a really scary thought, because then these people know there's an Asian person living at this house, and it kind of just puts this fear in your like head, you can't step out, you can't go anywhere. And a lot of Asian people described like they felt so ignored, and they felt like an outcast in America. And it's like, if you think about it from just a single perspective, if you're in a class and you feel left out, it has like such a big effect on your mental health, and you feel like it really upsets you. Like if you imagine that on like a greater scale, and you're feeling left out in a whole country, where do you go with that? Because that's going to have such a big impact on your mental health. And it's like when other people in your community are being hurt, they're being injured, then that also puts the fear in your head, like I can't step out my house. And especially with like big things like a virus, you can't play the blame game with it. You can't be like, oh, where do I put the blame? That you can't blame people. And it's like, oh, let's just blame Asian people. It doesn't make sense to me. Like you can't play the blame game with the virus.
I just find it fair that people that refer to COVID as the Chinese virus, they're the type of people who won't wear masks and won't take, preventative measures or precautions to try and stop and prevent the spread. And it's just kind of mind-boggling how they can try to like fault someone else for the spread, even though they're the ones at fault. It's just very hypocritical to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just going back to ignorance. Like they're not bothering to like do the research and like realize they're just putting it on like the Chinese population. Oh, they like they're the cause of the virus, really. Like, and they just need to open their minds and be like, oh wait, maybe we don't know best, and like try and learn from other people as well.
It's also like how Alex was saying, like people in power, like Donald Trump, if they have a certain like viewpoint or a certain ideal, a lot of people will follow that ideal as well. So one of his ideals was that the virus wasn't really like a real thing, and he didn't take it seriously, and that's why it was so widespread in America, because he didn't actually believe it was a virus and didn't really take preventative measures fast enough.
And this is a man who told people to drink bleach to try and get rid of the virus. So it's like
Very credible health advice.
Yeah. It's like another thing that sort of like is really just getting to me is that 33% of the media reported COVID with pictures of Chinese people, and it's like that is so damaging. It's like people are going to look at this, see it's like Chinese people, and it's be like, and then sort of refer it to the Chinese virus. Yeah,
it's basically slander on a wider scale, and slander is illegal.
Mm-hmm.
So slander isn't it's illegal. You can be sued for it. So I don't know how, news outlets putting that and basically slandering a whole community, how that was acceptable and how people didn't really call that out.
These are the same people that are calling the shots, though. That's one of the worst parts of it is you can sit back and look at this and say, oh, racism is wrong, but then you realize like the kind of magnitude that it's kind of at, and the people that are kind of using these things, making these equivalencies when there's not really a basis for it. I mean, it's happening in this country, it's happening in America. Like you see the virus attributed to these Asian people, and like we've been saying it, but like it's worth repeating. It's not their fault. You cannot blame certain populations just because they were, they were supposed to kind of step up and tackle it when it became quite a big problem. Like there was so much in their response to COVID that if we'd have done that, maybe we would have fared better in lockdown. But like the communities are being damaged in a very real way, and the reason there's not a whole lot of accountability is because a lot of the people who are the worst offenders are the people who are kind of immune, because they're the people who are kind of piloting the system.
It's also like you can't exactly call COVID-19 a Chinese virus, because as we've said, it didn't like necessarily originate from China. It just was mass spread in China, And it's like as well, like you have an example like the Spanish flu. They call it the Spanish flu because it was mostly spread in Spain, but people believe it was from Spain, but it wasn't. It was originated elsewhere in Europe.
Hmm. I also find it so funny that we learn all about this history, and it's like, oh, we learn it so we don't end up repeating it. But so much of history is just constantly repeating itself. But it's just like it's just being pushed under the rug, and it's like you teach us all this, and be like, oh, if this happens again, it'd be so bad. But it is happening again. But no one wants to be like, history's repeating itself. Maybe we should learn from it and change something this time.
And as well as like as you said, like we're taught history not to repeat it. We're not exactly taught about the whole history of the UK and our racism towards the Asian people and Indian people, like through through colonization.
Mm-hmm.
Like we completely like disregard that part of history of Britain. And I feel like that's where like most ignorance comes from as well, just like of our education system failing us
Mm-hmm.
and not educating us on the proper things that we need to be educated on.
Yeah, it's like Asian hate now hasn't just like randomly come out of nowhere. It's always been there. And
Yeah.
I feel like hate towards Asian is so generalized, like it's so normalized. Like the accent jokes, the curry jokes, is if someone says that, then they won't be called out on it because it's just a joke, it's so normalized. And it's like I feel like now is the time to people just need to start turning around like, no, it's not just a joke. That is a serious thing. Like the amount of rice jokes I used to hear on a daily basis, the accent, the curry jokes, it's ridiculous. It's not funny. You can't make fun of someone's culture because that's very damaging on their health. And a lot of people do grow up with, I hate my culture, I hate my skin, I hate my this, because these people out there are saying all this and then just going, it's just a joke. You can't take something like this as a joke.
It also doesn't help with the fact as well, teachers let microaggressions slide too like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be like having a conversation and someone could say like a microaggressive thing towards Asian people, and a teacher would do nothing, even if someone else, another student, called it out to them.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, they would not do anything. So I feel like, as a society and like as like individuals, we need to become like how do I say this? Less tolerant and more active in the way that we engage in conversations. Mm-hmm. So if someone like makes a microaggression in a conversation, we need to like call that out and make sure that the people making those microaggressions understand why that's damaging and it's toxic and it's not a healthy thing to do, and it's not and why it is racist. Because I feel like the start of change and the start of becoming less racist is through education, because that's where like all hates and all like phobias come from. So you have xenophobia and like hate from, I think it's hate from people that are immigrants, I think. And it's like it's a fear, it's labeled as a fear, like a fear of the unknown. And if you know about that unknown, there's less to fear about it, like if that makes sense.
Yeah, like school has a lot of workshops, and like some of those workshops could just be cancelled out because they're not really that necessary, and just instead of those workshops they could have workshops that are like teaching you about the cultures in other countries. And if there's things like that in school, then kids are learning more, and then it's like they're less likely to treat something as a joke. It's like a lot of people, okay, like like bindi jokes. So bindi is something Asian people, most like Indian and South Indian people wear, and like a little dot in the middle of their head. And it's a big cultural thing. People wear it. Some people wear it for religious purposes, and every time someone gets a spot there, they just make so much fun of it. And it's like, if people were educated the history behind a bindi and why it's so important to Indian people, then they would understand it more and not make fun of it. And like you said, schools are very quick to be like, we don't tolerate racism, we don't tolerate bullying, we don't tolerate all of this, but nothing's being done about it. When it happens, they sort of just brush it under the rug, and it's like, oh, it's done now, it's over and done with. But they're just so quick to advertise themselves as, we don't tolerate racism, but they do, because there's nothing being done about it.
I feel like when these kind of conversations happen, they're really sparked due to like a very serious and critical thing that's happened in the media. So a lot of like the BLM movement was started when all the George Floyd things was happening, and it's kind of sad that something that extreme has to happen to spark these kind of the conversations. But I feel like we should have these kind of conversations anyway,
Hmm.
We shouldn't have to wait for something this extreme to happen to have a conversation about it. It's something we should always be, talking about and trying to push an agenda forward.
Yeah. And like before you said as well, it is kind of to do with like fear, because for so long people have been portrayed as like dangerous and like you should be scared of them. And it always reminds me of this one time where I was sat in the bus, so I was sat at the back, so I was kind of just looking at the front, and this old woman was sat there, and she was sat to like this guy before, and then the guy got off, and some other guy came on, and this guy was Asian, and he was East Asian, so either like Chinese, Korean, or Japanese. He came and sat next to this woman, and within like the first few seconds, this woman like zipped up her bag, pulled it closer to her, and it's like, he's not going to do anything to you. This guy is not coming across as threatening in any way, but just because of his race, you're like assuming he's going to hurt you. And I know this is a bigger problem with older generations, and I feel like they get an excuse saying, "Oh, it's just their time. It's difficult for them to understand." But that can't be used as an excuse, because if this guy had noticed this woman was doing this, and I don't think he did, and I'm kind of glad he didn't, because then he'd have like a fear of getting on the bus and sitting next to someone, because he'd know that he threatened someone without realizing. And it's like,
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of time where people are like, "Oh, well, my grandma doesn't understand racism, or she doesn't understand this," and it's like, well, it's just her time. It's really difficult for her to adapt, and it's like, as her like granddaughter, or like as their grandchild, it's your responsibility to sort of like teach them, I guess. Like, we've come so far and we've still got a long way to go, but we need to be actively doing things to get to the point where we can all be in peace. And it's like, if people have been given the excuse like it's just their generation, we can't change them, then we're not going to get anywhere, because they're still a big generation who aren't changing. And it's like, it's always the same thing where it's like, change can't happen overnight, but it's also not going to happen if we're not doing anything.
So I think one of the reasons that I think, the older generation may have a little bit of a harder time adjusting is because they haven't been in an area, not been in a cultural space where they've seen fair representation of the Asian community on the screen. I mean, I think if I'm being honest, I'm not entirely sure about how like Pakistani and Indian communities have been represented. I don't know a whole lot about that. I know that when it comes to the Chinese community, that sort of region, there's been a lot of representations on screen where, because obviously you have films like Mulan, who like the animated version had really that was really big for the Asian community. But then if you look back within film history, you begin to see things like Breakfast at Tiffany's, a really big film starring Audrey Hepburn, but it also starred Mickey Rooney playing an Asian character. And by today's standards, I watched it late 2020. It is a very uncomfortable watch now. Knowing what we know today about, white people playing Asian people within a movie role, like a lot of those violent stereotypes like bad eyesight, big teeth, a difficult to understand accent, the stereotypical kind of dialect, that's all there, and it's all incredibly strong. And there's a lot of that in film history. I mean, even in the 80s, you had Flash Gordon, which had a white actor playing the main villain, Ming the Merciless, which is this wise but incredibly evil Asian character. And that is a representation that hasn't really gone away. Like, there's some of these representations we think, oh, the stereotypes have changed. Not really. They've just kind of changed form a bit. So like the big evil wise Eastern kind of force, and the China doll, I think was the time I was watching a brilliant video essay on this by a YouTuber called Khadija Rambo. And she was looking at some of the Asian stereotypes that exist in cinema. There was like, I think the Dragon Lady. I'm trying to remember exactly what these terms are, but you had like China doll, Dragon Lady. These people who are these like violent Asian stereotypes, and they've kind of become a part of cinema, and they still kind of exist within that space. Especially the China doll, which is like the kind of cute, submissive girlfriend type. that is the lead interest of the main character, the lead love interest, I should say, of the protagonist of the film, who is, you know, often a white man. In that kind of mixed relationship, that is something that is heavily, it's right there, and it's embedded within cinema. It's within cinematic history. It's within cinema today as well. So I think that when it comes to looking at how these people are treated in real life, they're going to base what they see on the screen and attribute that to the people they see in the world around them. And that's one of the main things that kind of drives up this hate towards the Asian community, because they've seen on the screen the Asian community in a certain way, and they're going to see that as that's going to be their only real exposure to the Asian community, and that's why they see these people in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. And it's also to do with when you sort of pride yourself as a country that's really diverse and you've got a lot of cultures and ethnicity, you also then have a responsibility to make sure they're being represented as well. You know, you can't just base every movie on just the stereotypical sort of white life, you know, and just give out sort of really stereotypical roles to other Asian people, you know, like not just Asian people, but anyone of color. You know, you can't just give them a stereotypical role. And it's like sort of like the Asian people always just get given the role of the smart sidekick, and it's always that role as well, and it's getting so tiring, you know, always just getting the smart role. And I know a lot of Black people experience this as well, where they're either given the role of like the athlete, and there's more to someone than just like that stereotype, you know. And it's like, and then it's like, yeah, the statistics are like sort of East Asian people outperform everyone in like exams and stuff. It's, yeah, it's a thing, but you can't just base their whole representation on that. Like, they're smart and most athletes are Black, but you can't just base their whole representation on that. You can't just, the Black athlete, the smart Asian kid, that just needs to go, because, you know, there's more to life than that. I know I'm not making sense, but my point is like, you have to like give someone more of a representation. You have to show their life, you have to show their culture. And I think another really sad thing is sometimes when I see someone like in a film or something, and I like sort of recognize that they look Asian, but then they're just playing the role of a white person, and there's like, or not even a white person, even if they've sort of got an Indian name and everything, but they never show any of their background, they never show their culture in it, they're just playing like a casual role. But it's like, show more culture, show more background than other people. But like we were talking about, people need to be educated. That is a good way to educate people. In media, everyone consumes media. If people are watching films and there's some cultural stuff shown, there's some more background to an Indian character, then they'll understand stuff, not just like the forced marriage, the smart kid.
There is a clear difference between like appreciation and a stereotype. And I feel like in film, we haven't really, you know, separated the two ideas. Because I feel like it's mostly, not to be like, you know, not to stereotype, but it is mostly white directors that enforce that, you know, that heavy stereotype of ethnic characters. And I feel like if we want a good, you know, like an Asian lead or like an Asian character in like in film and in movies, you need to have a clear understanding of what that means, not just as a stereotype. You need to do more research into that culture, you know, ask actual Asian people there and like have their input and, you know, what they feel like an Asian character should be, or like, you know, like an Indian character, like a Chinese character, a Japanese character, what they should be and what they should represent, rather than just a stereotype. Because those stereotypes are what go on as well to be, you know, portrayed by different people that watch those movies.
Yeah, it's like,
because, you know, film and, you know, like media, they influence a lot of ideas and ideals, as like we previously said.
but it's like that. It's like you do take away a lot from films, and the ideas, you do take them away. Obviously, if I'm watching a movie and an Indian person is being like really stereotyped, I'm like, I know what the real culture is, so I'm able to call it out. But a white person who doesn't really like, isn't around a lot of Indian people, doesn't know a lot about the Indian culture, they will take that in as the culture. They will see that as like what the culture is. And that's like you said, they need to get more people involved in sort of showing what the real culture is.
I'm just waiting for an Indian Disney princess to be made, you know, because like anyone, like any like little girl who was like brown would like associate themselves with Jasmine, but like they never like explicit about like what her culture is, like what her ethnicity is.
Mhm.
And that's quite frustrating as well, because like they're just like grouping everyone. It's just like, oh yeah, brown, and then like, that's it. But like there's a lot more to it.
With that being said, it's also like it's represented like so wrong. Like if you think about true sort of Indian culture, the culture is sort of like you cover up, you know, and then there's Jasmine. Is it? Yeah, Princess Jasmine, and she's just sort of like, that's not true Indian culture. And that's also, sorry, there's something else I was thinking about, what we talked about as well, like the extreme hypersexualization of Asian women. And it's like, that has a big impact on their life. And like Alex was saying, they're also just, with the China doll effect, they're just sort of seen as like the submissive, pretty girlfriend. But you know, you can't just represent people as, so you can't put someone in a category and continuously then enforce that category, because then that's what people consume.
Jasmine as well. She isn't like an Indian character at all. Like she may be a brown character, but I feel like we've had Mulan as our own like Asian representation. That's for like light skinned Asians, and I feel like as like people even like in the Asian community kind of discriminate against like the skin of your color.
Oh yeah,
So like
colorism
say
is
you have
a
like
big thing.
so say like I know all this like we're all light skinned, like ethnic people, but I do know some like dark skinned Asian people that have been discriminated against by like their own family for
Mhm.
being a darker skin. Like I
Mhm.
heard this I know like it's like not the most reliable source, but I heard a story from TikTok where this girl was talking about how she was at a family function and like they had like this little like festival kind of thing, and they had like a face painting station, and this lighter colored skin Asian aunt didn't want her daughter to have be face painted by her nephew just because she was of a darker color. I feel like as like in the Asian community, what I've been told from like a lot of my Asian friends that there is a lot of colorism and also as like also racism towards like black people.
I find it so weird that, it's like when two people are sort of like discriminated against, they kind of become friends, and and they just unite together. I find it so weird when minorities don't like other minorities, and it's like, we're they're against us. We need to like stand together more than anything. And another thing, me and my mum were talking about this today as well. I was literally saying, I don't know how, if this comes across as wrong, I'm sorry, but I was literally saying, life is so easy for a white person. Like, it's so easy for them
Yeah.
to get a job. Everything is just so easy for them. And my mum was like, well, if you go to India, life is probably going to be a lot easier for you because you're Indian. But that's just not true. Indian people pretty much get treated, white people, when they go over to India, pretty much get treated as royalty when they go there. People are always like,
Yeah.
I see all these YouTube videos, and I've seen it in person as well in India. People always say, oh, can I get a picture with you? And they get free food. And it's like, they get treated as royalty in my country, and they get treated as royalty in their own country. Where do I stand? Where do I go? You just can't win.
Like how you were saying, it's easy to live like in the world as a white person. I don't think a lot of white people realize the kind of like privilege they have. So like I heard another story where this woman, she did like a test where had she had two sets of CVs. One, they were like all the contents were were the same, except for the name. One of the ones had like a like an Indian name, so like like Tampreet. I'm not quite sure what the name was, but like like an obviously like ethnic name. And then the other CV had like an obvious like a white like a white name, so like I don't know like Colin or something like that. And then she sent those CVs out to people and out to all these different businesses. Um, she got no responses from the one where she used an ethnic name, but all of the ones that she sent the one with the white name to, she got responses back from all those companies. So it's just like it's proof and to show like how hard it is to be ethnic and have like that kind of like how you being a different race and having like a more ethnic name it's harder to have the same opportunities as white people.
We were talking about this as well with the stereotype. It's like, if someone does get in who's like sort of from a minority, there was like, oh, you only got in because of the quota, and that is like a big thing, the whole quota thing. And I saw this girl on TikTok who was basically saying that when they did sort of like the hiring process with the apprentices, they hired one I think it's Asian, one Asian person just for like the quota. And at
Yeah.
one of the parties, someone said to her, "Oh yeah, when we got the reports back, we hired one Asian person, but we didn't think it would be you who was the Asian person." And then she sort of reported it to management and she got fired. And it's like, what?
Like you could like get like with an apprenticeship, you don't know if you're getting an apprenticeship because you deserve it or because they're just like trying to get enough numbers of like, you know, ethnic people.
Mhm.
And it's
I think it's illegal to not have a diverse workplace.
Big companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, IBM, they like never sort of release their true sort of like things with to do with diversity. And I read this woman, basically she used to work at IBM, but then Microsoft offered her a job, and she was like, cool, I'll take the job. And then but then IBM tried to sue her, saying, no, we can't allow you to work for Microsoft because you can release our secrets, like our like sort of, you know, that sort of thing, like trade secrets. But she was actually the head of the human resources office. Then people sort of like started raising question, like, obviously she would know nothing about sort of like your work. She's just like the human resources person. But then there was a theory saying that they just don't want her to release information about diversity at the workplace because she would know that. And it just shows that, you know, most of these companies are just white employees, but they don't want people to sort of know that, you know?
Yeah.
I saw a thing, like this doctor, I think he's like a professor at the University of Netherlands, and he was saying like the level of discrimination in the job market hasn't changed since the 1960s. And like, that's crazy.
That's like 60 years. In 1960s,
Yeah.
that's like, whoa.
When the civil rights movement was when you're in the era of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and I know a lot of people say like, well, that's not us anymore. We've changed. You know, I can't be racist because I've got Asian friends, I've got black friends. It's something that's used a lot because people are intent on believing that this world has changed. And I'm gonna maybe incriminate myself a little bit here. I am in the very, very, very minute subsect of like the black community where I have experienced very little racism in my life. And I feel like that's something I might develop more on like a future episode of the podcast. But just to kind of do a quick TLDR, like I've not been disadvantaged that much in my lifetime based on like the color of my skin. I'm acutely aware that I am very much like a minority in that case. I'm like almost an anomaly whereby I know like my relatives and some of my friends have like suffered discrimination, but like I haven't. And so for the longest time I thought, oh, maybe the system isn't stacked against us anymore. Maybe things have changed. But that's just from my like closed-minded worldview. And then when you begin to kind of open your eyes, have a look around, do the research, you realize things really haven't changed all that much when it comes to attitudes, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to stereotypes, all these things. You think, well, maybe things are different now, but like they're really, really not. And it's very easy, again, from that place of not intentional ignorance, but like it's ignorance by proxy that you're not looking at the world and going, right, this needs to change. Like we've got affirmative action schemes in place, like you guys have like just been talking about now, where you have to fulfill a certain quota. How did we get in a position where we needed affirmative action? Why weren't people being accepted based on their own merits in the first place anyway? Why do we need to say to these companies, hire this person because you have to make yourself look diverse? Because a lot of times it just ends up being performative and it stops people from thinking, we'll give these people these jobs because they deserve it. Is no, we'll give these people the job to take a box and call it a day. When there's so much more to these people that just aren't exploring. And it's very easy to just kind of sit back, say, aha, look, we're not racist. Look at this, this, and this. But when you look at it, you go in deeper, you do more exploring, you dig a little further into the issue, you see that they're only there strictly to, you know, just look good. There's so much that people can offer in this world that you can't afford to just only have them as a quota. In this world, we need to kind of broaden our horizons a bit in terms of who we look at hiring, who we look at praising, accommodating, promoting like big positions in business, big positions in politics, the social sphere. All of these things, we need to look at how we can increase our representation, not just to tick a box, but to truly get a more diverse world, to truly get a world where everyone is accommodated for and everyone feels like they belong.
Especially in a leading position, East Asian people are less represented than South Asian people, but they sort of label it as, well, Asian people are represented, which is why it's like it needs to be broken down. The cultural difference between South Asian people and East Asian, North Asian, West Asian is so big. Like there is a massive difference. So for you just to be able to say like, well, Asian people are represented, no, that you can't say that. It's such a big difference. So like, yeah, it just needs to be broken down more. And it's also like stereotypes as well. Like every time, it's like Asian people are sort of like, not just Asian people, to be honest, everyone that's like not white, it's always being associated with like living on benefits and stuff, but that's just not true. And there was also this theory where it's like, do you remember that big thing where it's like, oh, they're taking all our jobs, and then there was like a thing that went around saying, what qualifications do you have to beat this person in getting this job? Yeah, non-white people are always going to struggle to get a job that a white person would get. So it's obviously, at that point, you have to recognize the fact it is just qualifications. You can't expect to get the job of a doctor with 5 GCSEs. That's just not going to happen. Yeah, and it's like people always seem to get angry, like, oh, they're taking benefit off our NHS, blah blah blah. But if you look at it, most of the NHS is Asian people. That they are your NHS. They're not taking benefit off it. They're not like just getting a free ride, And it always baffles me that they're taking our jobs, they're doing this. It's just the blame game. It literally is just the blame game. They just want someone to blame for like their misfortunes. It's like, I can't get a job. Well, guess I'll just blame that Asian person that got worked so hard.
I just want to say, like, how you've been saying, oh yeah, they are coming over taking their jobs. So, like, they are talking about immigrants, and from my understanding, immigration is a good thing for the economy. And because like immigration, if we didn't have immigration, we wouldn't have all the cultural things that we have like here in England or like in the UK. So we wouldn't have like Thai places, Chinese takeaway, like Indian takeaway, stuff like that, which like those kind of like restaurants, they do feed into the economy. And also like immigrants, not saying like some, not to be like generalizing, but some may be, less educated and may not have the qualifications to do like, higher paying jobs, but they are people that could do like retail work or like,
some of them aren't like educated, which makes sense because the education systems are so different. But the craziest part is some of them are generally qualified, like some of them with like teachers back in their country or like nurses and stuff, but it takes so much work to then sort of get the same qualification here because they just don't accept the fact that you already had the qualification there. Because the dinner lady at my primary school, right, she was a science teacher like back in India, and now she's just a dinner lady, which I'm not saying dinner lady is a bad job, but she has so much potential, and it's like she was so good at science as well. Like she'd explain stuff to me that I didn't understand with my teacher and stuff, and it's like it's sad that they kind of like lost that, if that makes sense.
Another weird thing with like the them and us mentality is that people begin to profile immigrants based on their religion, which is another thing that's become really prevalent and really quite damaging to the communities because, like there's been clampdown on immigration in America, predominantly Muslim countries. And again, it's that them and us mentality because, people will look at someone in a hijab and they will think, what if that person works for ISIS? It's a horrible thought. But like because of the kind of message that ISIS tout, they're not even a representative of true Islam. They are terrorists. They are a terrorist group, and yet their image is casting such a negative portrait onto like the Muslim community, and that has bled its way into legislation. I mean, particularly in France, like under 18s have been banned from wearing a hijab, like because they can't consent to it, or like some kind of excuse like that, whereby people are being robbed of their religious freedom just because of the image of not even a few bad apples, because they don't, at least like from the way I see it, they do not represent the Muslim community at all, ISIS. And yet their image is kind of being used to characterize these Islamic people that are trying to come into a country, and they're being shunned just because of people who don't represent who they are.
I think something about the hijab ban, that I saw this tweet and it really just, got to me. And it was basically saying the age of consent in France is 15, but the age of consent to wear a hijab is 18. And that's so crazy. Like, okay, like I don't understand. France's mentality with like things being forced or like pressured into is the younger the age, the less will happen. So why is the hijab ban at the age of 18? Why? If they want to be like, also, like you said, no one, there are obviously some people do sort of like get pressured into religion, but what people don't understand is that Islam is such a peaceful religion, and there's so much freedom and there's so much consideration within the religion, and like it's being portrayed as such an aggressive religion, and that's where the issue is. And another thing with the hijab is it's kind of being labeled as a religious accessory, but a hijab is not a religious accessory. It's part of the religion. It's what makes up the religion, And the whole thing about your parent not being able to come with a school trip on you if they wear a hijab, it's like they're sort of just looking at it as a whole. But once you break it down, imagine it like this: you're going on a school trip and everyone's parents are there, but everyone's like, let's say everyone's mums are there, but your mum can't be there because she wears a hijab. That's such a damaging thing for a kid to go through, and they're just not looking at it like that.
Like, I'm pretty sure religious freedom is a basic human right.
Mm-hmm.
They have a right to their religion, so why can't children?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't people who practice that religion and who are of able mind to make their own decisions, obviously due to law, because the age of consent is 15, they can make logical decisions way before they're 18. How can they not have that same freedom or that same right of choice?
And the thing with the hijab is so many young girls look up to it. Like, they've grown up seeing their mum wear it, and they want to just, they want to get to a point where they can start wearing it. And no one starts wearing it at a really young age. They start wearing it at an age where, they think is sensible, or like, it's something people look forward to. Like, I remember when I was younger, I grew up with a lot of people wearing the star or like a turban. And I remember growing up, I always wanted to be like, I want to start wearing one. Like, I really want to wear one. And my mom was like, oh, like, it's a big commitment, like, you're really young, how about you wait a bit? It's like there is a lot of consideration that goes into it, but it's something you look forward to. Like, I was convinced I wanted to wear the star, and I know a lot of young Muslim girls, they want to wear a scarf, they want to grow up so they can wear a scarf, but then being told, oh, actually you can't wear one until you're 18. It's like telling someone they can't wear a scarf, it's bad as something they're trying to avoid, which is forcing someone to wear a scarf.
Like, on paper, it sounds so stupid that you could be arrested for wearing an article of clothing. It's just, it's like when you phrase things differently, it just sounds so dumb. Like it just sounds so stupid, and so it's like irrational. Like, it's just.
You know what's really funny about people like this? It's that they can never explain what they're doing because they don't even know what they're doing. Like, they don't know what they're doing. Like, if you ever try to like get someone who sort of went, like, I was listening to this today as well, and this, I don't know, the march that happened a while ago where these people went to sort of like this march and during COVID, and they listened to music, blah blah blah, and the guy was trying to get him to be like, why did you go to this march? And he, for the life of him, could not explain why he went to the march, because these people have racist values, but they struggle to explain them. And I find it so funny, and it's like, you're clinging on to this thing for your life, but when someone's trying to get you to explain it, you can't do it. Like, they just can't explain it. It's actually funny. It's like, oh, so why are you banning the hijab? Well, it's because of this. It's because of that. It sounds stupid. It sounds just stupid.
It's because they know it sounds stupid, and they know that what their ideals, they just don't make any sense. Like they make no sense whatsoever.
Hmm.
If it was a rational ideal and you like it was, justified, you could explain it,
Hmm.
but you can't. You can't explain it. You don't have the same like you can't like be like you can be passionate about it, but you can't have like a valid, like tangible reason for your hatred and
It's like,
racism.
okay, yes, I stutter a lot. Yes, I stop every minute to say, is that okay? But at the end of the day, I'm able to explain myself. I'm able to argue my point. I know everything I'm saying is sort of like on the right line, because at the end of the day, I'm not discriminating against someone based on their race, based on their age, or anything like that. You know, I don't look at someone on the street and go, oh, he's going to stab me because he's this, that. That is, I feel like at that point you're just sort of ruining your own health. It's on you, because you're willing to lose something because you're too scared to sort of go into it, if that makes sense.
It's just it's not a natural thing to be racist
Yeah.
because like it's not showcased in any other species other than humans, and it's a behavior that's nurtured from your surroundings and growing up.
Like the reason that racism is so prevalent is because of human nature. There's arguably an element of competition in there, and the way that that competition has manifested itself historically throughout time has been through like the lens of racism, ostracizing certain people, having an us and them mentality. You can have that, that competition, so that you have a group of people who you can assert power over. So I feel like racism is just a manifestation of that. Same with like homophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, like fatphobia, all of these things. It's it's enforced through like a desire to have power over something. And I think especially when you're looking up to certain institutions, trying to, institutions that are looking to change, and then you see like these stereotypes being upheld, you feel powerless. I think that's kind of, of like the racist people who have come through and made those laws. That's kind of like what they wanted. And yet this new generation that are coming through, wanting to defend national pride, which I understand you want to defend national pride, but at the same time, it comes at the cost of all of these new communities. You're trying to enforce a certain narrative. So with education, you don't learn about the British Empire, and you don't learn about other cultures as much, simply because it's too much of a break from what we've come to understand. That's not us. That's not our national identity. Our national identity is this, this, and this. And yet you're not acknowledging the way in which that's changed, that's evolved throughout time. Like, I think it's important to have kind of a flexible mindset about this. Like, there's so much that we don't understand yet, and there's so much about the world that we don't know. It's important that we begin to break down those walls, really investigate what it is that we don't know, and instead of being afraid of it, integrating it, using it, because that's how we all move forward. As we move forward together, you can't create a society where you're moving on and we're divided. You cannot have that division. You need that peace, you need that unity, you need that understanding. And it goes like back to the Islamophobia point. As you were talking earlier, give it a quick Google. The European Court of Human Rights has, they have certain court cases, and they have to provide rulings in line with the European Convention of Human Rights. It's a roundabout way of saying that in Turkey, there was a court case where a Muslim woman was banned from wearing a hijab in university because of a law that they had in Turkey. Now, from what I understand about the way European law used to affect law in this country, that European Convention of Human Rights is an incredibly important document. You got to follow that to the letter. Article 9 is a freedom of religion. That's what Article 9 is. In essence, it is expressing that religious freedom. 16-1, that law in Turkey was defended where she wasn't allowed to wear a hijab. 16-1. One dissenting voice in that group of 16. There's in this world, people like to pretend that they're not racist. I'm not saying that these people were racist or Islamophobic. I'm just saying that that's what they upheld, whether they knew it or not. And you have to be willing to accept other people for who they are, for how they want to express themselves. Because now in Turkey, if you go to university, they are allowed to ban you from wearing a hijab. And if there are similar cases elsewhere in the European Union, they can turn around, look at that case as like a convention and say, all right, well, they did that in Turkey. We have the same license here to stop you from doing the same thing. And that's, I know, like, it feels weird to say from our position, what we're like 16 to 18 years old, change Z. We are this small group from Derby, and we're commenting on all these big issues of the world, but it has to start somewhere. And it can start with us if that's how we want to move forward. And it's important that we call out Islamophobia where we see it. So, like, signing petitions, raising awareness, donating to these religious groups, across the world, like sending aid where it needs to be. That's the way forward. That's the way it's meant to be, because we have to try and move together in a system where we're together. We can't afford to just limit ourselves to a single line of thinking. It's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly limiting to who we are and how we can express ourselves.
I feel like in every episode we always have this point going on, and I feel like it's something that needs to be enforced like so much more. It is school. Education and everything we pick up in school, it's what we kind of keep with us for life. So if school just had a better education system with teaching people about different cultures, different backgrounds, teaching people about sort of sexualities and everything, like generally teaching, not just sort of doing just trying to tick a box like, oh yeah, we taught them about this today, it's done now. Generally teaching, being passionate about it, getting young people to be passionate about it, then you might get somewhere. It's like if a lot of people can get together and change the mind of someone in a leading position, then if with the right education, we have the ability to change the mind of someone who sort of grew up in like a racist household. Because that's kind of where it starts as well. But like, if you hear your parents make a racist remark, you're likely to go up to someone and make the same remark because you're just following what your parents are doing. But if the education system sort of cares about things like this more, then it's something that can be challenged and it's something that can be taken care of.
In my experience, I had a very, white upbringing because I am, I'm half Jamaican, half Irish. So I had like very white upbringing. I was one of two black people, like one of four black people in my primary school. I grew up, with those microaggressions of like, racial microaggressions towards like, Asian and black people. So I've always grew up with that kind of idea of like those kind of stereotypes towards those kinds of like those groups of people. And it's still like even though I've been educated, I have more like Asian friends. I've asked them questions about their culture, trying to better myself. And I understand that those like stereotypes I did once hold are wrong, and like not all people in that community are the same, and like stereotypes, they are incorrect. But to like that still like that kind of upbringing still affects me to this day. Of like a lack of education, of not knowing certain things about certain people. I still kind of subconsciously judge people based on the color of their skin because of how I was brought up. So I could see an Asian person walking down the street and I would think, oh wow, like zip up my bag, make sure I'm safe, rather than thinking that's the person. And like I kind of feel bad for having those ideals because I know that's not the case most of the time. Like that's what my upbringing has, that's how that's affected me, and how that toxic thing, like I understand why and like how
Like
people
that's
have
what's
those ideals.
important. Like it's important that you're constantly educating yourself and you understand that when it happens it's wrong, and you're willing to just stand there and be like, you're willing to reflect, you're willing to be like, this is wrong. This like reminds me of a story. I saw this girl on TikTok, and she was basically, her parents enforced the idea of being gay was wrong like so much on her that she like adapted those ideas, and she saw that being gay was wrong. But one of her best friends came out to her, and she got like so annoyed that her friend was gay, and obviously she saw that as disgusting and like outed her friend to like the whole school. Like years later she got like kicked out or something, and her friend took her in and like looked after her and did everything for her. And then she sort of confessed to her friend like, hey, when you got outed at school, like that was me. And the friend wasn't like annoyed at her, which I think is so important. Like the friend sort of like educated her, and she's like, then she was like, now I see, like I was the one in wrong. But she's educating herself. That's why the power of education is just like amazing. Like the fact that obviously there will be a point where this girl will sort of like just kind of be awkward, and because it was enforced on her at such a young age. But the fact that she was able to educate her, the fact her friend was able to educate her is so important. And that's something that not just your friends should be working on, it's something schools should be working. I can't say this enough. I generally just do not like the school systems.
Like schools have the opportunity in like PSHE lessons and RE lessons to actually get a valid point across. But like thinking about, like, I've learned nothing in PSHE, like even just like taxes or whatever. I don't know any of that. They're just basically, they're teaching us like surface level thing, but nothing's actually useful. Nothing's going to help us in the future, and nothing's going to like break down like people's ignorant thoughts, because basically they're just not really doing anything to help us for our futures.
Mm-hmm. And like you said with that as well, me and my friend were talking about this. So I'm very fortunate that I have sort of parents who are like well educated and they understand all of this. They're able to tell me about taxes, national insurance, council tax and all that. But me and my friend were saying that some people sort of don't have that. Some people don't have like parents guiding them, so they sort of just go into adulthood not knowing what like sort of anything is, and then they sort of getting in trouble because they didn't do their taxes right, they didn't pay council tax or any of that. And that's so scary, because school should be preparing you for that. Because wait, if you think about it, right, if it's up to our parents to teach us these things, then why are we being taken away from our homes 8 hours a day? Because they're like, what, school will teach you everything, but school's not teaching you everything, because I'm still having to come home and sometimes ask like really stupid questions. And sometimes I generally ask really stupid questions, but then I sort of have to think like, why didn't school teach me this? This is something school was meant to teach me. Honestly, it's not helping with anything. I still don't know how to buy a house. I still don't know about mortgages, council tax, or any of that. And I still don't know about different cultures, because with RE, it's so focused on how the religions were found, which is so interesting. Like, yeah, that's something that should be taught, but at the same time, also teach about the culture, the background, and what people's lives are now. Like, if they did like little sessions, like a day in the life of an like South Indian person, and they generally showed the life, not just like this whole, I'm so poor, I live in this poor hut, which is, yes, it's a reality. The gap between sort of the wealthy and the poor in India is massive, and that should be reported on. But at the same time, generally just show the life of someone. For someone who's lived in India, or everything they show in sort of school is not true. And people sort of turn around and look at me like, what, you lived in a slum? And it's like, they're showing you sort of like this 100 square meter land, and you're trying to label that everyone in India lives there. Yes, it's a reality. People go through it. I'm glad it's being reported about, but also tell people, the sort of like the rich people there who like sort of live in these massive buildings. Tell people about the general people there, like just the normal general life.
It's a very like a fixed and biased view of that country.
With the education system, I feel like a lot of it is the priorities of the syllabus are what's really throwing people off, because individual schools are at least making that effort. I know there are a lot of schools that can't say that. I think, I've heard about Catholic schools who have just not taught about other religions because, they're a Catholic school and they have to prioritize Catholicism because of that. So they just don't learn about other religions. Like, it's just not on the syllabus. And that's not to say, like, there are individual schools that really do push the boat out and really do at least try. Like, I've had lessons on, even if it's in like the most minute of experiences, there's still been that conversation there. There's still been that element of, okay, let's discuss Hinduism, let's discuss Diwali. Like, that's kind of come part and parcel with one another. Let's discuss India, let's discuss Japan. How representative that is down to what they've been given. And the school's trying to expand and elevate on that. So really, when it comes to trying to define what it is about the education system that works, you've got to look at the syllabus and find the areas where it doesn't work. Maybe they don't teach about how to pay tax. Maybe they don't teach about, honoring other cultures as well as educating people about them. And there's a lot of things that we're just kind of kept out of the loop on when it comes to other cultures, especially Asian cultures, in the syllabus. There's such a rich tapestry of history to explore, not necessarily like the most positive representation of Britain, because of course you have the British Empire, and that was quite steeped in racism, and there was a lot about British relations in India. But I remember being taught a lesson or two on William Wilberforce liberating the slaves in primary school, and I've never heard his name mentioned since. I only know his name because I heard it in a song like the other week. There's so much that we're just not told about, especially when it comes to Black culture and Asian culture as well. Like there's a lot to draw from, and it's a wonder that we don't learn about these things, because there's so much to draw from, and there's so much that we can educate. Because if you don't learn about the history, it's a bit morbid, but we may be doomed to repeat it. These small microaggressions, they stem from us not knowing about this culture, and that's what needs to shift. That's what needs to change. And schools, to their credit, they are trying. That is a fact. They are trying, but they're not succeeding because of the tools that they've been given. And that's what we really need to kind of begin to develop, try and change, is what schools are given to learn from. Like, they've taken Mary Seacole out of the medicine through time specification. Schools do not have to teach about Mary Seacole. Luckily, my school did, because they said even though she's out of the specification, it's important you know who she is. So we're going to teach you anyway. But there are people across the country who might not have had that same experience. There's so much that we can learn, that if we were just given the opportunity to actually learn it, a lot of these problems may not be as applicable to the world as we personally see it today, as they are. Because we can say all these things just because a lot of this knowledge just isn't provided to teachers, so it can't be given to students, because there's no chance that we'll learn how to be inclusive and representative, because teachers aren't armed with the equipment that they need. So that about does it for this episode of Change Z. Make sure you follow us on social media, because not only are we making episodes about racism and these kinds of topics, we've got loads of posts about it too. We've got videos on our accounts, on our Instagram, Facebook. We've got a Clips channel on YouTube where you can check these videos out as well. We've got lots of posts on the way, more episodes every month. So subscribe to Derby County Community Trust on YouTube and Change the Clips on YouTube, so you get all of that. Make sure that you follow us and you keep up to date with Change Z, and we will see you on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.